guys, this is Kenjiro and welcome to another PaintShop Pro video. So previously I had a video that showed how to create pixel art. And now we're going to take pixel art and convert it into a cross-stitch looking image. So now to jump right into it, this is the starting pixel art image that I'm going to use. And this is just one I created, and given the holiday season that we're entering, this is baby Jesus in a manger with the star kind of overhead. And before we kind of get into the cross-stitch technique, I do want to mention that just basically, if you have pixel art, you create a pixel art image like this. As you can see, the resolution's really low. It's 50 by 40. That this in and of itself could be a template for cross-stitching. So like if you're wanting to actually create real cross-stitch and not do a simulated one like we're about to do, you can use pixel art as a template just by printing this and using it as a reference. But in our case, we're going to want to create, using PaintShop Pro, a simulated sort of look like this is cross-stitch. And one thing to consider is to make this a reasonable sized image, we're going to have to enlarge it. And we're going to want to do this in a very strategic way because we're wanting to match what's going to be sort of like the single stitch pattern to each one of these pixel squares. So the way that we'll want to consider that is, the cross stitch pattern that I'm using right here is 30 by 30, and I'm going to provide this for folks so they can use it if they want to kind of follow along and do this test. So since the single box or pixel should be 30, when we resize our pixel art image, we're going to want to increase it by a size or a factor of 30. So we'll go to Image, Resize, and then 30 is going to equate to 3000%. And since we're trying to increase our pixel art, we want to make sure that our resampling is using pixel resize so that we don't get any anti-aliasing when it enlarges. So with all of these settings in place, we'll hit OK. And then what we'll see is that the size has now increased to 1500 by 1200, and we should be a nice multiple of what that cross-stitch pattern is. Now, just as a quick test, so I have placed the cross-stitch pattern where my patterns folder is for PaintShop Pro. So then if I go to Materials and click Pattern, I can find that cross-stitch pattern in there. And if I were to just click the Flood Fill tool and created a new layer and then just filled it, what we should see is each of those little X's should line up perfectly with one of the squares or pixels or whatever you want to call it on the image. And in this case, we can see that that is the case. So our resolution is good at this point. So now that we're here, we're going to want to create a few masks. But to make this easier to see, we'll create a new raster layer and we'll just promote the background layer so that we can raise that up to kind of somewhere over here. And then we can just fill the background with, I don't know, some color that's just easy to see. And then we'll put this back on top. All right, so now what we want to do is create an overarching mask for the shape so we get rid of all of this extra gray that's kind of around here. So we can just simply choose the magic wand, select our layer with our pixel art, change the match mode to color, and then just click, and then you'll see it's going to highlight everything that's not part of our pixel art. And this is nice because I don't have any holes or anything, so doing it contiguous or not, it kind of works out well. And then with that guy selected, we can say mask, hide selection. And then what we'll see is that created a mask perfectly for our pixel art. And then our background is showing through in all the other places. So then we can right click with our magic wand to turn off the selection. And if we turn on our cross stitches, then we can drag that underneath the mask, and you can see now that is also confined to just the space of the pixel art. So now we're going to want to create yet another mask, but we're going to want to base this one off of the opacity of the actual cross stitch flood fill pattern. So then what we're going to do is we're going to turn off this mask, turn off the background and turn off our pixel art. Then we'll select the actual pixel art, and then we'll say mask from image, but then now what we're going to do is say source opacity. So now it's going to take, all the transparency that is in our image right now based off of the X's layer and create a mask. So we'll hit OK. So then now if we turn this off, turn our pixel art back on, and now we'll see that it very nicely has confined our colors to be of this cross stitch shape. And then if we turn our overarching mask back on, then we'll see now it's also confined to just the shape of the pixel art. Now the cross stitches themselves had a bit of detail on them. So if we want to bring that back in, we kind of want to overlay that detail so that we still retain the original color but have sort of this shading of the lighter part of the X is on top and the darker is on the bottom. So then with this layer on top of the pixel art, we can just change the blend mode to soft light. And it's really subtle, but you can see that it does kind of give it that little bit of texture, right? So it's not just a flat color. If you want to enhance that sort of lightness to darkness transition, you can always modify the contrast of the cross stitch layer. One way I think that works well for things like this is to actually use the adjust sharpness unsharp mask. And you can see, so the radius, needs to be a little bit bigger than it normally would be for actually sharpening edges. And, the strength you'll just want to play with till it kind of gets that little bit of shininess on there. Once again, it's subtle and it's just a matter of what kind of look you're going for. Next, to give the cross stitches themselves a little bit of separation from the background, I like to do a drop shadow. There's a few ways to do it, but for me the simplest way is to use layer properties. So I'm just going to duplicate this group and turn the original off. And then I'm going to merge the group. And then go to layer styles, and I have a preset that I call just above. And essentially all that does is it aligns the light source so that the shadow is directly behind whatever is on the layer. It's a little bit too strong, so I'm just going to bring the opacity back. And you can see it just kind of darkens, behind just a little bit. Don't want it to be too much or else it's going to darken the whole image more probably than you want. So just whatever you feel like creates just a little bit of separation of the stitches from the background. Okay, so now we're looking pretty good, but this is a pretty tight image, I would say, like tight against the framing. So what we can do now that we've kind of got all the stitches and the pixel art aligned and everything, we can go to image and say canvas size and select the middle because I want to keep this kind of focused in the middle, but just add some margin around the edges. So then here, even with these settings here, this kind of gives us about 200, around the edges, so we can see what that looks like. And that's not too bad. I think that's a fair amount of margin. So then we can turn that off. We can create a new raster layer and bring it to the background. And I have another pattern that I've created that I'll also make available, which is sort of like the cross stitch, background, like what you kind of sew these things into. And it's kind of a seamless background. It's not perfect, but it kind of mostly gets there. I got to scale it down a bit, so I'll bring it to 50. Hit OK, and then we can use the flood fill tool on this layer. And then now we've got that sort of, look and feel of like these stitches are on top of the material that it's supposed to be on. If you really want to, or if it seems value add, you can try to adjust, the stitches so that they somewhat match with the holes in the background. I'm not super concerned with that for this demonstration, but depending on how much detail you want to put into it, that's something that you can do. And also, if you feel like you know, it's a little too perfect. Like the grid is a little bit too perfect. What we can do to kind of give just a little bit of variation is we can choose the warp brush and select the noise warp mode and then bring the strength pretty far down. Like mine's down to 17. And then you can just kind of like paint over, and what you'll see is it just adds sort of like a randomization of position ever so slightly, you know, just, you know, all over these X's. So it just gives a little bit of waviness to it, and you can kind of do it as much or as little as you like. And it just kind of helps remove that sort of sense that it's like, oh, these lines are all too perfect for this to be a cloth material, if you will. And that's basically it. You know, it isn't meant to be like a super realistic looking cross stitch. It's really meant to just kind of convey, you know, that sense of what a cross stitch would look like based off of some kind of pixel art drawing to begin with. To top it all off, you may want to add like a frame or something like that, or if you're into scrapbooking, maybe this is just something you add as like a swatch on a page or something. But anyway, that's it for this one. This is just showing another way that you can use pixel art, not just for like video game, a sprite creation, but for other artistic things. And this can be applied for any other type of, you know, square, low resolution based art that can be created. And as always, if you have any questions or would like to suggest content, feel free to leave a comment. If you'd like to get updates of new content, click the subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me and the channel, check out my Patreon page, which is on the link on the screen. And I'll see you guys next time.